change this. Hey everybody, we'll be starting momentarily. To get officially started. Okay, to anybody who, hey Tyler, and Alex. So for those of you who are not familiar with Zoom, welcome. This is in the webinar function. Some of you might be used to the other one where we could all see each other, but this is a webinar function, which means you'll see Tyler and Alex when I promote them to panelists. And then when it's time for questions, you could type in your questions in the Q&A box. On the bottom of the screen, it says Q&A. Try to avoid writing anything in the chat box because we could all see it and it could be a little distracting. So any questions you have, you'll type it in the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen. And you type it in there. I would wait maybe like 20 minutes or so before asking questions because Alex and Tyler are going to talk about the industry, screenwriting, everything in between. So some of the questions you might have might be answered within those 20 to 30 minutes. So wait till Alex gives like the heads up, start asking questions, and then you could start typing it in. So the first 30 minutes or so, Alex and Tyler are going to talk, and then we're going to a Q&A. We'll ask them your questions, and then they will answer it. So this is our first interview series with Alex Robb. And he brought an amazing guest, which I'm super excited about, Tyler Hisel. So let me promote them to panelists, and we can meet them and see them face to face. And we'll get started. Cool. Hey, guys.
There we
go.
How are you?
Doing well.
Cool. So welcome. I know Alex, you've used Zoom before, but Tyler, if we haven't used Zoom, welcome to the magical world of Zoom. So we're super excited to have you, Tyler. Tyler, for those of you who didn't read the bio, has been staffed on M. Night Shyamalan's Wayward Pines. He wrote for Lure on Amazon. He wrote Dark Was the Night. He's been selling things left and right. I am so inspired by you and everything you're doing. It's insane. I see Bradley Cooper. I see Paramount. I'm like, oh my God, this is bonkers. And most of you know Alex Robb. He's a manager at Insignia Entertainment. He set up projects all over town. He's working with a couple of our writers. He's awesome. He's tough, but he's awesome.
He knows that too.
Yes. Thick skin you need with Alex Robb. So cool. I'm going to I'll be here the whole time. I'm going to shut off my camera. I know Alex has some, you guys are going to talk for a little bit about screenwriting and everything. And I'll be on the whole time. So it's time for Q&A. I'll come back. And then we'll kind of just jump right in. Okay?
Cool.
Cool. Awesome. Cool. Then have fun, and I will be here, and I'm excited to listen.
Sweet. All right. Okay. So normally we have people to look at.
That's right. Well, that's right. Speaking into the voice.
Yeah. Normally there's people here, but that's all right. So, all right. So appreciate you obviously taking the time to do this. We have this just general goal objective of helping writers understand what it's like to actually put your creative and professional and your career on a path that, can turn into something fruitful that's not sitting in your basement or just, 2 a.m. cranking away by yourself. So
most of it though.
That's most of it though. That's most of it. Let's be honest. That's most of it. So, okay. So let's start off with just tell us a little bit about, kind of your motivation when you were coming out of the Midwest of Kentucky, wanting to get into the industry because it's not like Kentucky's a big hub of entertainment.
No. It's a lot of things, but it's not that. I mean, look, I was that kid, growing up from Kentucky originally. I still have a place back there a little bit outside of Lexington where I'm from originally. And, I was that kid who grew up, running around his backyard with a Sony Handycam making movies. And it was a hobby for a while. And then I got to that point where I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life and made a decision to kind of punt on that and just keep making movies and get a a media degree from a small, liberal arts school, and thought I wanted to direct, and made that leap after college. Came out to LA full time, thinking I wanted to be a director. I grew up on Night Shyamalan's stuff. That was like, that guy he was living in Philly, and he was like writing and directing his own stuff, and it was kind of Hitchcockian throwback stuff that I really liked and wanted to do. And I was like, okay, so I'll be a director, and just writing was the thing that I was doing to have stuff to direct initially. And yeah, came out and did the hustle, did the LA hustle, and the writing stuff. I found out very quickly, directing in LA is very expensive. Writing is always free. And then I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the writing stuff kind of got traction, and I was like, okay, I'm not gonna question that, and just keep chasing that path. And so we were off.
Okay. So, professionally speaking, now for those of you who don't know, Tyler actually started off in the industry as an assistant to a very well-established, Academy Award-winning, badass producer, the Copelsons. And so tell us a little bit about how, while you had the initial interest of writing and directing, you ended up going down, let's say, the business path first.
Yeah. I mean, I came out and I was desperate initially just like stop hemorrhaging money. When you come to LA, it's a very expensive town. My first job, when I got to LA, I was loading people onto the Simpsons ride at Universal Studios. That was my first job, like a candy striped shirt. Anyway, but like,
whoa! Do we have a photo of this somewhere?
There is a photo. It is not publicly accessible.
Put this on the gram, people.
But then I was like, I started doing background acting. I was like, okay, I can get on the sets if I do that. Like, I just wanted to try to get anywhere adjacent to what I wanted to do, and so I started PAing, and I had done an internship when I first come out with the Copelsons, and after 8 months or so of just doing whatever I could do to pay the bills, the phone rang from someone that I'd worked for, an assistant who was moving on, and I jumped onto a desk over there, and yeah, it was just trying to get anywhere close to what the people who were doing the thing that I wanted to do, and writing at night and constantly just churning away on my own stuff while trying to just absorb as much as possible, whether I'm an extra on a set or I'm an assistant, making hair appointments for my boss. I was at least hearing those conversations.
Okay, so that's actually when Tyler and I met. The query, if I remember the broad strokes, was, hey, are you looking for more clients? Because I'm a writer and I've got a script that's really great. But your experience of finding representation, starting with me and then us finding representation with an agency, was, in my opinion, pretty unique, because obviously not a lot of writers, especially if you're outside of Los Angeles, which I'm guessing a number of people are, it's not the most common path. But do you know of other paths that have been, let's just say, either fruitful or writers that you've known and worked with that came up in different ways that ultimately makes your path unique to their path, if you will?
I mean, that's the challenge, right? I mean, that's the challenge of this career. It's like there is no set path. And it's the frustration. It's the eternal frustration of everyone who ever wants to do this job, is like, you can look at one person and go, oh, they did X, Y, and Z, but then you look at what they did and it's like, oh, this happened, this weird little circumstance and this coincidence led to an interaction with so-and-so. Well, you can't replicate that. You just kind of have to be ready to catch the ball when it comes your way, and you're not gonna do it every time, and harkening back to our first interaction, I was on a desk. I was had this script that I was working on for a while, and we had moved offices, and you were trying to reach some development executive or something, and then sent me an email, and I was like, oh, here's his number, because we changed phone numbers, and then I did something I totally shouldn't have done, which was like, oh, I see your manager, I've got a spec, they're looking for anything. Because I was ready to move on from that job, and they fired me anyway. But that was it, and that's not. It's something you can't say. Oh, just do that because 9 out of 10 times the pairing it wouldn't be right or so, it's just whatever. But like you just got to be ready to take, to put yourself out there, and that's the tough part. It's like 99 out of 100 times the answer is always no in this town, and it's not necessarily because of you or what you did wrong. It's just the timing's not right, or the person's not right, or the taste isn't right. It's the way it is, and so
you got to keep plugging away to find that intro that's gonna snowball, if you will. Well, it's interesting. So some of you guys may or may not know this. When I met Tyler, I was right at the beginning of my career and was even debating whether or not I wanted to go down the management path. And so I believe he was my second client, which is kind of crazy. Why that's noteworthy is because of the fact that 9 out of 10 times you're going to face rejection, you kind of have to wait for the stars to align in some ways. Now let's kind of take that and build off it to talk a little bit about, you mentioned your interests as a filmmaker. Obviously, when you started off writing, what did you know about the business as it related to what you were passionate about in the genres that, you ultimately focused in on today, which generally speaking is elevated genre, action thriller, conspiratorial, suspense, paranoia. Anything else I'm missing in there?
Hey, whatever pays the bills.
Okay, whatever pays the bills. Remember that. But so yeah, talk a little bit about how, your interests creatively, led to, obviously we did Dark Was the Night, and it was previously titled The Trees. But talk a little bit about, when you're vetting something, when you're looking at something, what draws you to a property and, or an opportunity, because not everybody out there, we hear a lot about OWAs and getting paid to write, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but just talk a little bit about how you personally have focused in on various genres and how that has built bridges for certain producers, buyers, etc.
When you come up, especially when you're starting, like the first things that you write are just kind of your take on something and like. It's like I mentioned Night Shyamalan, like that was a big Hitchcock, like those are huge influences for me, when I was just starting to make my own stuff, and I was like, okay, well, what's my take on that type of thing?
Okay.
And from there, it sounds simple, but it's just like write the thing you want to see, write the thing that you would write that pilot that you see that promo for and be like, I'm gonna watch the hell out of that show, and whether that's what you feel like the market is telling you should be writing, or you feel like that people, that you feel like that the wind is blowing this way and maybe you shouldn't do that thing, like that you can get in your head a lot. And at the end of the day, like if you're juggling, do I do this or do I do that, it's like, what's the thing that's going to propel you out of bed in the morning and put you in that chair, whether or not you're looking at the tea leaves and going, well, that's not exactly a 4-quadrant, this or that. But you can write that, and it cannot be the thing that's exciting you. And if it's not exciting you, it's not going to excite anybody else. Yeah.
That's a good point. So I say this to Joey, or I've said this to other writers, because I get asked a lot about brand, genre. What should I be writing? Generally speaking, you've honed in on your core passions and interests. That being said, due to the fact that a lot of what you do, I would put in a category of elevated, sophisticated, closer to the post than, say, I don't know, like Pacific Rim or something. So do you feel like those calculations, even though it fires you up because of those stories, do you feel like there's risk in that sometimes when you're trying to kind of go more into almost like a niche brand? Okay. Now, because of that, you've got a wife, you've got kids, you got to spend time away from them. You take on that risk. How do you handle that, knowing that you may not succeed because it is sometimes a narrow creative focus that some people will or will not appreciate?
Yeah.
Let's take, for example, let's talk about Liberty, when you pitched that around, and how relatively lukewarm the responses were just off of the concept and the characters. So,
sorry, go ahead.
so yeah, so just talk a little bit about following what your passions were and how you overcame those obstacles and dealt with, the challenges of juggling life a little bit. You know what I mean?
No, that's a good question. That's always the evaluation, right? I mean, like, and just to circle back, Liberty was this pilot that was set in the world of this armed separatist militia in the woods of Alaska, and I came out. I go back and forth between Kentucky and LA. I spend the majority of my time in Kentucky unless I have to be in LA. And I come out and I'm talking about this idea that I had for this show, and to your point, like the response was a lot of, well, we've tried the militia thing. We know there's a lot of them that have been tried. It's a tough area. And oftentimes you can go, oh, well, maybe I was wrong and I shouldn't do that. And I was fortunately in a place, I was working on another script. It was a feature spec that I had bounced to you and my agent at the time for notes. And my wife was out of town, and I was like, I'm just going to write Liberty. I'm just going to write this spec because I was so confident that I knew these characters, and it was that thing that was gnawing in the back of my head, and I could get out of bed in the morning and do that. And so I hammered that out in a week because I was just confident that I had this character story that was different. I didn't know what the other things everyone was always talking about were, but I felt like this was unique enough unto itself for me that is different. And that's always my advice, to young writers is, unfortunately, the majority of the time when you execute something, when you put a script down, the majority of this business is failure, but if you're gonna miss interesting, because you can try to do that big thing that everyone else is doing. You can try, like for me, like I have no desire to ever go out and write a pilot of a network procedural. There's a million of them, and I'd rather have half of the people who see something think it's great and half hate it than everyone think it's okay, because no one remembers the guy who's okay. And so take big swings. That's it's riskier, but that's what it takes to kind of break out of that noise, of everybody else who's banging on the door. Is like, well, that guy did something different. Whether I like it or not, there's a voice to it,
Well, as many of you guys know, I'm a absolute stickler for voice. Talk a little bit about voice and how that shapes genre for you, as well as what format you're writing in versus film to television. Because, you previously did Wayward as an example. Now that style of that show is, very specific. But just talk a little bit about how you've looked at the various narratives in the genres and how you approach them from a physical writing standpoint. Like, what do you want to bring out of the narrative and the characters in that space?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, for me, tone is so important for me, just for me to understand what a movie is and a show is. Whether it's a period piece in the 60s or whether it's this, small town genre piece. Like, for me, what I need to know before I do anything is, how does that feel, and I can, as you could probably attest, when I convey that on the page, that can result in me overwriting that, because the tone is so key to me. And so it's funny because I'm on a show right now for USA, and when you're on a show, when you're on a staff, you read a ton of other people's stuff constantly, and you very quickly realize, oh, I can recognize so-and-so's pages from so-and-so's pages, but no one's names were on them. Because each writer, I think, when you get to that place, just has a specific cadence to the way they tell stories, but two, just the words on the page. This is more blunt. This guy, like I said, I tend to be front load scenes with a lot of atmosphere and tone as well. It's just, you just kind of develop those habits and those in your own kind of accent. Night Shyamalan once mentioned it, him as a director, he said he had an accent, and a lot of directors have accents, and some don't have accents, and I was like, that's a very I think eloquent way of putting it. At a certain point, that voice that you're talking about is an accent of sorts.
That's a good way of putting it. Absolutely. Okay, so we've over the years had a lot of successes and a lot of steps at the plate where it's just a swing and a miss for whatever reason. I'm thinking of the, I want to say it was like late 90s, early 2000s movie with what's his nuts from X-Files. David Duchovny.
Okay.
And I believe the movie was the TV set.
Oh yeah, I'm not too. Everyone talks about the TV set. I'm not seen it, but go on. This could be a dead end. Go on.
So this is okay. So this is interesting. We're going to talk just real quick about the financial side of the industry, because a lot of writers, until you're actually getting your first deal or even your second deal or your third deal, obviously, preferably if you're in the Writers Guild. I want to talk just a little bit about how in that movie there's an actor who books a pilot with him, and he starts immediately saying, "Oh, I'm going to go out. I'm going to buy a new Passat." And just don't buy the boat.
Don't buy the boat.
So let's talk just a little bit about like how, when you have your first success. So just to give you guys a little bit of context, probably about, 8 years ago that we did Dark Was the Night, that first deal, I want to say.
Yeah, probably.
So obviously the WGA's, scales and things of that nature have increased. But just talk real quick broadly about like the time frames of how long it takes for you to get to that point where you can actually pay off some debts, buy a new phone, maybe buy a new car, et cetera.
It's the tough thing. Like, I mean, that's this industry is very much feast or famine, and the tough part is, and the pitfall that a lot of people fall into is like, oh, I've made my first sale, I got my first whatever, I'm in. So how much should I make? I'm just going to make this much money all the time. And that, thankfully, I'm neurotic enough that has never been, I'm too insecure to ever assume I'm never going to work again.
Which everybody should be.
Help. It's helpful for that reason because yeah, I mean, I had a number of sales and pilots and 2 movies made before I even let go of having a day job, because I didn't want to let go of the security of that until I had to. Yeah. And thankfully, when you have to, that you don't need that anymore, but at the same time, like, there's a freedom that comes with not having the weight of the finances on top of you. Okay. You know what I mean? Okay. Like when you have something steady and you're not going, oh my God, the money's in 6 months, I'm not going to be able to pay my mortgage, or what am I going to feed my kids? Like that just murders creativity. Okay. Sure. And so, yeah, it takes a while, and particularly if you're in LA, that cost of living being what it is, it's tough. And yeah.
So okay, so then just briefly, kind of give us a sense of whether it's your experience or other writers that you worked with or other writers that just give us a little bit of a sense of you were back and forth to LA, right? How did you handle the pressures of, because I remember when you made that leap, and made me nervous because of the stability that you were giving up.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that calculation and what you felt confident in based upon the work that we had done, leading up into that decision, if you will, right? So, because you don't just randomly say, oh, I sold a script, I'm quitting my job, I'm free. Yeah. You have to build a lot of foundation and set up a lot of dominoes. So just talk a little bit about what it took to kind of set up some of those dominoes.
It was a confluence of some good things kind of stringing together at once. Like I said, we'd sold some movies, we'd had some independent movies made, we'd sold some pilots, and those, you get that money, you put it in the bank, and in my mind, you just act like it doesn't exist, because it's time.
Yep.
That's, to me, what that money represents is time before it runs out. So even to this day, I like in my office, I have on my dry erase board the date that the money runs out.
Well, you
which is a super not healthy thing to do. But that's what I do. And so anytime that I get something, that day gets pushed back. Because today, like that's what it represents to me, is that's time where I can do whatever I want before I have to, do something else.
Right.
And so thankfully that day just gets further down the road the further you go. But yeah, I mean, like when I finally made that league, I mean, just to back up for assuming nobody knows the story, I was in LA full time for about 4 or 5 years after college, and we had met and we had gotten, the ball rolling and had that script, The Trees, had hit the blacklist in 09, I think it was the 09 list, and had agency representation, and kind of felt like I could try this back and forth thing. My wife and I were thinking about having kids, and so we were like, okay, well, let's go back and get a place in Kentucky. I'll come out if it's every 6 weeks or so. We'll try.
Sure.
And so we started doing that. And now when I'm on a show, I'm sitting next to you. I'm in Los Angeles right now because I'm on a show for 6 months.
Right.
So that's the trade-off, is the chaos of not really knowing where you're going to be, being on planes all the time. When you get a TV job on a staff, a lot of times you get the final word on a Friday. That's what happened on this show. It was Friday night around midnight. It was, you got the job. It starts Monday, 10 o'clock. And you're like, great, okay, so I'm on a plane tomorrow to get out here for the job. That's the
Just to
trade-off.
clarify, that's actually happened probably a couple of times for various properties, correct?
TV, I mean, that's the nature of TV. It's crazy. Like, and particularly when you're early in your career, you tend to be those last people hired on the show, and so like if they have enough money, they're going to hire you, but we aren't going to know if they have enough money until about 6 hours before the room starts. And so like that's our staff writer on this show. She found out 2 days after the room had started, she got the job. So she had to come in, like she found out like she had to be in the next morning. It was great, but that's how it happens. And so
So different than film, though. Obviously, film
is a glacial pace.
Is a glacial pace by comparison. Now, film does require you to do some, if you're not here, it has required you to be here at certain points, meeting with the studio or meeting with the producers, right? But let's talk real quick about just career advice as it relates to television and film, because film does move much slower. What's your advice for emerging writers who may only be like, oh, I'm only going to write films, or I'm only going to write TV shows? What's your opinion on being flexible?
I mean, the nature of the business, what it is right now, it's very tough. I know very few people who are starting or have started in the last 5 to 10 years who are exclusively screenwriters. It's a tough time for movies right now. It's a great time for TV. It's a tough time for movies, and so that's a noble goal. I thought initially I came out with a feature spec in my back pocket. I wanted to write movies, but at the same time, you can do that, but you can't wall yourself off to TV, particularly because so much of the storytelling, this type of stuff that a lot of us like to do, which is like, for me, it's a lot of that mid-budget adult thriller, prestige-y commercial stuff. Doesn't exist hardly in features, but that's TV now. That's a pilot 9 times out of 10. So it is having that flexibility. But if someone's not in Los Angeles, that's the question a lot. Is like, what do I do?
Did I write TV if I'm not there?
Yeah, and do I move to LA? When do I move to LA? Do I move to LA? Do I have to move to LA? I mean, I think the answer is you can write a script from anywhere. You can write a feature from anywhere. You can sell a feature from anywhere. But if you're looking to really say that thing hits, say that script makes a splash, if you aren't there, talking to what we referred to earlier, if you aren't there to catch that ball and to be in a position to maximize on that opportunity, it can be lost. And so my advice is always, yes, you can sell that feature from anywhere. But if you want to get that next job and you want to make this your living, certainly if you want to be in a room on TV, you have to be in LA. But you need to at least have that in your mind that at a certain point you may need to be in LA for a full amount of time to capitalize. I mean, the early months of our relationship was just getting into rooms with these people and who put a face so that you're that guy that they remember. Oh yeah, I like that guy. And when his name comes up for some staffing meeting 5 years later, I can't tell you how many times that happens.
A lot.
Where it's, oh yeah, so and so's the executive on this show or has moved to this studio, and they remember and like you. Yeah, cool. They'd love to pass you along for that.
Sure.
And so, you know, all of that to say, you know, LA is something that I think everyone needs to be ready to dive into a little bit for a period of time, if nothing else.
Sure.
But you know, if you're doing TV, TV's here.
TV's here. Like very few in New York.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, New York used to be bigger from a production writing room standpoint. But okay, so how are we doing? Okay, so we're doing pretty good on time, Joey, right? I want to say.
Yeah, and if anybody has, I have a bunch of questions, but if anybody else has questions, feel free to type it in the Q&A box now while they start wrapping up.
Okay, so I want to talk real quick about, in the industry today, producers are in a position where development funds, they just don't exist the way that they did 10 years ago. Writers are continually being asked to do more. Producers are being asked to do more with a lot of risk. But I want you to talk a little bit about what's it like going through something where you put in 2, 3, 4 months or longer. I mean, there are properties that you're currently working on that you've been chipping away at for 6, 8, 9 months at least. So just talk a little bit about like what's it like when you go through something, you put in a lot of work and a lot of passion and energy, and then it doesn't go forward. How do you keep going? I mean, outside of the fact that you actually have to pay the bills because you have responsibilities.
Right. Right. No, it's. I mean, the one thing that, and I had a discussion with another writer who's on the show that I'm on currently about this. We were giving advice to a younger writer, and I think the mindset, when you're very early on, you're hanging on to every interaction. Every foothold is your only foothold, so it means a lot. And what you very quickly learn by getting punched in the face enough times, as you're alluding to, is that ultimately you need to have a mindset of letting success surprise you. Okay. Because like 9 times out of 10, even the biggest names, the biggest guys who are doing whatever, 9 times out of 10 the answer is no. And it's that thing's not going to go forward. And so that means a few things. That means always having a few things going. Don't be that guy who has that one script that everything is hanging on. Okay. I mean, if that's your only script that you've written, great, but like start working on that next thing while you've got the feelers out on this thing, because you have to. And it's just because it's just not going to go 9 times out of 10. And so, early in your career, you have those relationships with producers who may say, oh, I want you to work on this thing. And, oh, no, I don't have my development fund. I can't pay you. And, there's no easy answer, because you're in a position where you can't just say no to everyone if someone's presenting you an opportunity. But at the same time, you don't want to be whiling your days away doing something that may not even exist at the end of the day. So I wish there was an easy answer outside of like, there are good people in this industry. There's a lot of them. And try to find those people, because
there are also a lot of shitty people.
Well, that was
I'll say it. There's a lot of shitty people in this industry. Okay. So, all right. So that being said, through to today, you've got film, you've got television, you've been asked to do, you have deals and have had deals where, technically speaking, you have a contract that has steps that you're supposed to get paid for in the midst of you writing. However, multiple times you've had to take it on the chin to just make sure that the material, draft after draft after draft, is where people want it to be. Talk a little bit about where you have to manage the producer's expectations, the studio's expectations, maybe the talent, the filmmaker or an actor's expectations, and how you continually get put in a position where they're bringing the best out of the property and the best out of you, but you put in a lot of work along the way outside of your guaranteed steps. Just talk a little bit about how that process works.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is all a symptom of a shift that's happened in the industry, which is the industry has moved away from, what you're referring to, these multiple step deals. Back in the day, a writer would get hired, you pitch something, and a studio would hire you and say, congratulations, we want you to write it. And, we're going to pay you for 2 drafts. We're going to pay you for 3 drafts.
Right.
And
Guaranteed.
And so what's happened though is those have gone away in favor of one-step deals. So you're going to get one bite at this apple, and if it's not up to snuff, you couldn't be fired off of your own movie.
Yeah.
And so producers are aware of that, and for a producer, that may be the only shot they get at this concept. Maybe the studio doesn't want to move onto another writer.
Sure.
So you get it put in a position as that writer where you finish a draft, you show it to your producer, and they're going to have notes, as well they should, get the partners. But there's a pull to that where they know that this, for their purposes, needs to be the best, absolute best. This should be a shootable script, which is not the way that deals were designed. It was supposed to be a development process. But because this may be your only shot, and if the draft isn't at 100%, there may not be another draft for you. There's this kind of twisted incentive now to keep going through pass after pass with producers, and so it's constantly an evaluation for you as a writer of making sure making sure you feel comfortable with the work and doing the work, that it's strengthening the project. And a lot of people get stuck in that process and ultimately just say, okay, to the producer, this is the draft. This is what's going to go into the studio. And that's an evaluation of that relationship. And you want to be that team player. But at the same time, you got to manage your own finances and make sure you're using your money to provide for your family. So it's a constant evaluation. It goes back to what we're talking about a lot. I think it's just can't overstate the value of finding good people to work with, that you trust, that not only have the project's best interest in mind, but are looking out for you as well. And if you find those people, you hold on to them.
Yeah. Now we'll jump ahead here in 1 second, but to that end, one of the other things that we've learned over the years, it's not always the big name producer or attachment per se, as it is the person who's the most passionate. You've had experiences where you've worked on things where you probably now in retrospect could recognize that the producers weren't as passionate as others in other situations. Grabbing onto good people, keeping those relationships alive and well is obviously very important. But just talk a little bit about the differences between, one producer who, let's just take an example real quick with Andrew Panay and Panay Films. So for those of you guys, as Joey mentioned, Tyler has written a property called The Fixer for Paramount and Bradley Cooper that's based on a true story. And it's in development. We recently heard from the studio head that they're looking at filmmakers. So the ball's rolling, but it's been a long process. What's interesting about this, though, there was another producer that we had interest from who was a quote unquote bigger producer. But we went with the comedy guy, right? It's talk a little bit about like how do you figure out whether or not you go down one path or another?
Yeah, I mean, it's just circling back. It was one of those things like what I talked about with Liberty, where I kind of came out, and when I come out, because I'm in Kentucky a lot, when I come out, I have 5 or 6 things that I'm just going to ideas that I'm going to talk to. Yeah, just to talk about with producers and get as a sounding board, and this concept that ultimately became this movie, the script at least, was one of those, and I thought it was special, and I found this true story and locked it up, and thankfully, yeah, and we talked. I talked around town to some producers and had some people that were in the mix, and then you have to make that decision of like, well, who do I go with down this path? Who do I try to develop this with? And at the end of the day, you can look at a piece of paper and go, oh, well, this person makes this type of movie more often, or this person can get so and so, or this person can get that. But at the end of the day, enthusiasm and belief in both you and the project are really the only thing that gets you that last mile that means anything.
Sure.
You know, you can find people around town that'll take a flyer on just about anything, but you need that person, you need those partners, and that's talking about reps, that's talking about producers, that's anybody that you deal with that you feel like this person gets it.
Right.
They want to make the same movie I want to make, and they aren't just gonna kick me out the door the second that it becomes expedient to them as a producer.
Right.
And so, I mean, that's it. And again, it's just kind of that trust and that vibe and excitement. You can't overstate the value of excitement of sitting down with someone and just seeing them like, oh, they're gonna kick down doors for this idea, and the way you're gonna do it is exactly the right way. Like that's what it was for that, and that's what I feel like is the most valuable thing for any. This is all a marathon. This is an Ironman race getting a movie made, and so if that person isn't excited at the beginning, they are not going to stick with you when it hits the fan. So.
All right, so I want to take just a few more minutes, and I just want to talk real quick about before we open it up to the Q&A. I want to talk real quick about pitching versus speccing. And now I have a perspective, obviously, as somebody who is constantly pushing material, developing material. You have the perspective, obviously, as the one who's creating the material. But as you know, whether it's film or TV, pitching is very in vogue, right? Now, I'll tell everybody out there, this guy prepares more in a pitch than probably actors like Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep do for their Academy Award-winning roles. So
neuroses I was talking about.
It's that neuroses, and it's important though, because that level of polish shows people how dedicated you are, how prepared you are, how passionate you are. But just talk a little bit about the work that goes into a pitch versus the work that goes into a script.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's the evaluation a lot of times, and it changes as you go through your career. A lot of, when you're starting out, it's like, do you pitch or do you spec? Well, if you're trying to get people to even take your calls or sit in the room with you, well, you got to put something on the page for those people, But as you get into things and you can go and people know who you are, and they will at least hear you out about working with you. It becomes an evaluation of like, well, you can just come in and pitch this, as opposed to going off and writing it. But for me,
I know you don't love pitching.
I hate pitching.
Okay, to clarify, he hates pitching.
But because it's
he's really good at it though. It's like
no. My process is I like, because I'm back and forth a lot. I script it essentially, and I send that to my producers in the studio, and I say, this is what I'm going to say verbatim. This is what I'm going to say, and you can mark it up, and we can make revisions like you would on a script, and that's super helpful for everyone to know going in, because there's nothing worse than after 2 pitches, the producer pulling you aside and being like, I think we should change some stuff about halfway through a week. That's a disaster. But yeah, it's a lot of work, and for me to pitch something out to the degree that I feel like I'm comfortable going in and saying, hey, Mr. Studio Executive, give me, $150,000 for this. For me to even walk in the room and ask that question, I need to know the movie. Yeah, I need to know everything. And so for me, that equates to, at the end of the process, always going, I could have written this thing. and sometimes I should have written this thing when it doesn't sell.
We've had those experiences where you've pitched something, people have enjoyed the pitch, but then you also realize, well, you know what, I'm just going to sit down and write it. And Liberty was an example of that. Well, okay, so we covered a lot there. We covered a lot of your personal path, a little bit of the industry at large. Now, we should open this up to some questions here, Joey, because it sounds like we've got some folks who are interested in hearing more, right?
Yeah, totally. Awesome. So let's jump in. First off, Tyler, I love your energy. I could totally picture you owning any room you go in. He's great energy. And Alex has spoken so highly of you since we agreed to do this. I'm so excited. Alex, you're a great interviewer too. You did such a great job.
I appreciate that, and I just hope I sounded clear and legible.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was awesome. Okay, so the first questions, since you've been in the writer's room before a few times, tell us a little bit about what the experience is like in a writer's room, and what is the most important skill a writer should have in a writer's room?
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one of these things where writing, there's kind of different meanings of the word writing. It's not sitting in a room squirreled away with your keyboard. It is a lot when you're speccing something. That's what I do when I run back to Kentucky in my cave. I sit and I room, and it's just me and the keyboard. But like when you're suddenly in a room full of writers, there's a process, and it's fun. What I love about it is that it's not just me staring at my magnet board with my note cards. It's suddenly the story is just this kind of organic thing that's moving and it's taking shape, and it's just knowing, how to be that collaborative person, because a lot of times you're even if the idea that you're pitching doesn't take, or the story's going a different direction than you personally would do it, it's like improv a bit to a degree, it's yes and a bit to a degree, and you play things out, even if that's not ultimately the direction that a story's going to go. If someone pitches an idea out of the room and says, well, maybe this character does this, or maybe we can get them over here, you can run down that path, knowing maybe in your own head even that, like, I don't think this is going to be in the show, but along the path, you're going to find something. And you being that person who's able to just add to that, and maybe that thing that you come up with works on a different version of it. It's just kind of collecting ideas, and
it's different than writing solo. Obviously, you've got to have ideas from others. You've got to share yours. There's a volley to it. I mean, ultimately, obviously, who makes the final decision in that situation?
Yeah, it's the showrunner. Whoever hired, who put that team of writers together is the ultimate arbiter of what's the show and what's not the show. And it's just kind of figuring out what your role is in that process too, particularly when you're starting out. Every room is different as far as kind of the protocol and the hierarchy. There are rooms where if you're coming on as a staff writer, you shouldn't say more than 3 things a day, and they better be gold, thankfully when I was coming in, it wasn't the case, because that's, I don't have that high of a batting average. But you just kind of get a vibe for the room. And a lot of that, if you're taking meetings with showrunners and maybe talking, if you get to that place where you're in the conversation for those jobs, you kind of just get a sense for it. One of the things I always ask when I'm meeting with a showrunner is just like, tell me how you like to run your room, and it's just, is it a loose kind of flowing thing? Is it a very regimented thing? How many, and they'll tell you, because they know that what you're asking is like, how late am I going to be there? like, do you want me to talk a lot or not talk a lot? So it varies, but it's just being flexible, and you kind of have to snap out of that mindset that you do when you're writing by yourself, where you are the god of this entire universe. That's not the case, and to the contrary, you are channeling your showrunner's voice, to what we're talking about earlier, and their sensibilities. It's less what would I do, and it's more like, okay, what would I do to fit the vision of the show that my showrunner has, because that's ultimately where it's going to go anyway.
Right. Cool.
There's some writers who, like, they just want to sell their pilot and they don't want to be staffed for whatever reason. Does that make their chances of selling their pilot that much harder because they don't have the credits, or are the two things just very different from each other?
I mean, you can speak to this as well. I mean, like, selling a pilot, I don't feel like, particularly in the climate that we're in right now, is predicated on having been in a room. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I had sold 2 pilots prior to being staffed. And Liberty.
Oh, Liberty.
Yeah, so what the thing we just talked about. And a lot of that is because what studios are now even more accustomed to doing. I mean, 10 years ago that wouldn't be the case, but now studios are very accustomed to buying something from a creator and partnering a showrunner onto that. They'll bring in an experienced writer who's created their own shows, who's run their own shows, to be that backstop, to run this new company that would be built around this concept. So it's not, if your goal is just to spec that pilot and to sell that pilot, it's not something where you absolutely have to have staffed. But the more people, to what we're talking about, the more people who know you, who've been in rooms with you, who know you're not a crazy person. That's the difference between features and TV. Features, they can buy a script from you, look at you and go, oh, you're crazy, I don't want to deal with you, and they can fire you, and they never see you again. TV, They have to see you. They have to deal with you. Even if you're not running the show, you're going to be in their world. And so, again, the more people are aware of you, more comfortable with you. And it's not like you need to be Mr. Amazing in the room. It's just a lot of times it's just not being crazy. Like I was saying, like get you pretty far.
Yeah. And I would add to that, I would just say that every writer, if you don't want a staff, that's one thing. As a representative, that's probably not the person I'm looking for personally, because you're giving up a lot of opportunity. But there is something to be said for how active some writers do want to be in the process. I think it's important that when you have an opportunity, because they don't come around very often, I mean, percentage-wise, everybody is different. But if you have an opportunity and you're able to embrace it and run with it, it can be a pretty big game-changing experience. So I would caution anybody out there with, ultimately not wanting to be part of a writer's room, because it's actually pretty fun.
Yeah.
It really is. You sit around in an office all day talking about creative stuff.
Right.
There's no widgets to, print on a press. There's no ditches to dig. So it's good. So just keep an open mind if you're on the fence of that. Okay, so who do we have next, Joey?
Next is Bill. Bill, I'm going to actually unmute you for your questions. I'm not 100% sure I'm clear of it, so I want to make sure that it's clear. So I'm going to unmute you. Hey, Bill, can you hear me? Here, let me unmute you too. Sorry, hopefully you're there. Hey, Bill, you there? Bill?
He's muted on our end.
Yeah, let me see if I can unmute him on my end for some reason. Bill, if you're there, can you just unmute yourself? And maybe as he's doing that, let's just jump to the next question. Because this is an important one. In regards to pitching, what do you believe is the most underutilized resource, if any? And also, maybe just generally talk about, if you go into a meeting and you pitch one of your scripts, they've never read it before, how do you format it? How do you like to lead with the pitch? What's the most important elements for you?
I think it's important to kind of define terms here too, because when we talk of pitching an idea, a lot of times it's, at least as we've been referring to it in this conversation, it's, you have a series pitch, or you have a pitch for a feature, and it's a very formalized thing where a bunch of executives are sitting around you and they're here to hear the whole movie, and you're going to talk for 25 to 35 minutes about this movie. Mm-hmm. And that is, the one way of pitching. The other is something that you just alluded to, which is I've got this script, or maybe even I don't even have this script. It's a lot of times what I was talking about, what I'm doing is I've got 5 or 6 ideas that I'm excited about, or articles or true stories that I'm excited about, and just seeing if that producer or that executive is at all interested in chasing that with me. In both situations, I think what's key is, yes, you want to have what the movie is, what the show is, and have that be exciting and unique and amazing and all the things that are easy to say but hard to do. But more so, why are you the person to tell it? And I think that's something that I always start my pitches out with, even if you're back, even if you know something's an amazing idea and it isn't the most personal thing, even if, it's a movie, it's a true story about this firefighter, wildfire firefighters, and your father wasn't a firefighter or anything, you have no connection to that. It's finding something that ties to you. Yeah. And if it's I've always wanted to tell a story about redemption, it's always something, some tie to you as a person that they can immediately go, oh, okay, this person isn't trying to sell me a widget, right. Because they don't want to meet with a used car salesman. They want to meet with someone who's telling them and is excited to what I was talking about earlier, that they can see that you're just invested in this more than just, here's a thing I'd like to sell you, please give me money. Because they want to feel that way too. They want to know that it's going to resonate for an audience and for them because it resonates with you. And so that personal connection, I think, is the most instrumental part of starting a pitch off the right way, at least.
Yeah, I'll add on to that as well. So one of the things that you do a great job with is before you even get into anything, you literally start with a personal, this is why I am into this.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I'm drawn to this. Talk a little bit about character, because, obviously character is more of your interest than a big high concept, explosions and, worlds and all that stuff. But talk a little bit about how character affects a pitch as well.
I mean, that's again, tapping into the things you want to tee up in a story. You want to kind of have that setup and that payoff for even in the verbal telling of a story. So when you start your story, you say, we're going to meet so and so, and this is the thing. When you're talking about that character right out of the gate, that there's this nagging thing about them, that this flaw, this drive, this hole in this person's soul that we can all relate to, or that we all have a piece of, that is going to frame this story. That this is just like you're the only person who should be telling this story. That's your argument. You're selling yourself as just as much as you're selling the movie or the show. It's selling that character. It's like, not only is it this crazy true story from the 1980s and the Reagan administration or whatever it is, but it's like, of all the people that were involved in this, or all the people that are in this world of this show or this idea, this is the person whose story is the one to follow. Because there's so many. I mean, things. I deal in true stories a lot in movies, and it's increasingly kind of a thing with IP. A lot of people have the similar pieces of history that they're developing, and a lot of times it's, well, what's your way into that? Who's your way into that? That's right. It's like, who's that person whose story is going to be the one that's different than everyone else's first instinct when they tell that story? Sure.
Well, that's good. That's good. Nice. Right on. Okay, Joey, what else we got? Is Bill ready?
I have 2 more questions, and I'm going to read Bill's question. I didn't see if it makes sense. I've had a few micro-budget indie films made, and now I have a screenplay for a film in the $30 million range. What's a good way to say that I'm targeting a studio for production instead of being categorized as indie? I guess maybe how do you pitch the budget, or how do you make sure that they know? Do you just blatantly say it, or do you say that through the set pieces?
I mean, I can speak for this. This is obviously your purview as well a lot, but for me, if I'm having those initial conversations with executives, with producers, what have you, that's not really even a part of my conversation. That's something. Yeah, certainly. And I'll say $30 million isn't something that's gonna change the paradigm for anybody. As far as storytelling is and budgets are concerned. I mean, again, just as a storyteller on the business side, the management and the rep side is something that you can speak to. But from a creative side, I never talk about it. How much this thing's going to cost, how I see, you can do it. I'm not trying to sell them on the feasibility of the production. I'm selling them on a story, and let me tell you this crazy thing that I just heard, or this world that I've been thinking about since I was 15 years old, and I just cracked the way into it. If you can come at it like that and get the excitement going, then hopefully a guy like this can come in and convince them of all the other stuff they need to be convinced of.
Yeah, and it's tough sometimes, because when you do account for the business side of the equation, if you do look at a budget, or if you think what a budget ultimately is, or would be kind of comp-wise, there is a factor in there that your representation should take into account, by which, who are they calling to help get that script to the next level? Because certain producers get 7 figures, certain producers get 6, 5, so there's an influence there that a producer has overhead, office space. They've got to have obviously their own home accounted for with their finances. So a producer is going to have to fall in love with something regardless. Mm-hmm. But as a writer go from a micro budget or a smaller budgeted space to the next level, my personal recommendation would be to make sure that you're knowledgeable enough about that space with the other films or the other announcements that you see in the trades, and then be able to speak relatively intelligently on, you know, essentially what you think the overall final look of that product would look like, because that has a tangible value almost to it, even though it's still ethereal, that you can see where a writer wants to take something. So I think that that's important if you're going to make that jump, and then be aware of as well, $30 million movies are on the outs. They're, you know, they still exist. The 30 to 40, $50 million movie still exists, but a lot of that's been replaced by streaming, you know, et cetera. So just be aware of the fact that that niche, in a lot of ways, is starting to kind of shrink a little bit, regardless of genre, whether it's science fiction, action, thriller, conspiracy, horror, whatever. Right. So yeah. So hopefully, does that answer Bill's question there?
Yeah, I think that answers it great. And the last question, what is your favorite part of working in a writer's room, and what's the longest to get used to?
Oh, what was the last part?
What takes the longest to get used to?
Oh, interesting.
I mean, look, my favorite part is being around other writers, you know, and that is something.
That's pretty cool.
It's great because, like, it's when and this is I kind of, because I'm out, because I step out to the other side of the country. A lot of times when I'm writing and I'm generating, I'm normally doing it on my own. I'm talking to execs a lot. I'm talking to reps a lot. I'm never really talking to other writers. I have friends who are writers and things like that, but it's for me, the best part is coming in and just talking to other people, 6, 7 other people who are doing all the things that we're talking about, you know, who, yeah, exactly, who just know the headache of this or the headache of that, or, like, you know, or ask. It's just camaraderie amongst other writers, which is which for someone who originally came from features was a completely unique thing initially, and it's great, you know, to just be able to learn from other people's experiences. And I mean, from everything, this stupid little thing about, oh, my accountant's telling me this. Does your accountant tell you that? Like, no, is they like that stuff. And as far as like the longest, the thing that takes the longest to get used to, I obviously it varies for each person. I mean, there are people who struggle with just kind of finding their place in a conversation of 8 people who all have ideas and all want to say them at the same time. But for me personally, you know, that biggest transition when I first started working in rooms on shows was what we were talking about earlier, which is like realizing that you're writing to someone else's voice to a degree. You're writing to their vision and trying to find how much latitude you have within that to do your take on that. You know, we're making ice cream, you know, and this person's doing strawberry ice cream, but can I do chocolate ice cream over here? And you know, you kind of navigate that to a degree, and obviously, like, how it works as a showrunner will take whatever is written by anybody and do their best to make it even more their own. But that's it. A lot of times you got to look at that. You don't just run off and say, oh, well, if this were my show, I'd write an episode. This is how I, you know, make scenes feel, and this is how this character would walk into the scene. It's fitting into the vision, this tapestry that's been built before you and it's going to be after you, of, you know, writing to someone else's focus and vision and all that stuff. And it's and that in and of itself, the challenge of that is fun, you know.
That's a really good question. All right, Joey, what else we got? Any others?
There's like there's a bunch, but I think it ends at 4. So I don't want to keep you any longer. But this was awesome.
Let's do. Do you have one really good question somewhere in there?
Yeah. So here's a question. This kind of goes for both of you. How can a writer best utilize a manager, and how can a manager best utilize a writer? How do you guys keep the relationship going?
That's good. Well, and it
couples therapy all of a sudden.
Yeah, all of a sudden. Yeah. Next question. I'll say this real quick, and then, you know, because we both have our perspectives. generally I would say most writers probably don't stick with their same representation as long as you have. Is that true?
That's very much true.
Okay. So obviously he and I have been together for almost 10 years, which is my longest personal relationship outside of family, which is, for there any single ladies out there, I'm looking, okay? I'll say this, over time it evolves. It evolves per time of year, per the format, film or television. It evolves per the players who are having a voice or a say. And it's really, you know, for me personally, when I started my business, if I was going to represent somebody who's going to be a diva or difficult to work with, they better make me a lot of money. I mean, and I learned that from being an assistant at another management company. We represented David O. Russell. And obviously his reputation precedes him. So, you know, you would put up with, or the reps would put up with the antics because you knew he was coming through with big quotes. Outside of that, I think probably one of the most important things as a representative with any of my clients is I've just got to like the person. You know, and I like almost everybody, you know this, Joey. You know, so if you get along, if you have a shared understanding or passion and interest essentially about like, what do you want to do and where do you want to go? That's a huge piece to the equation as it from my side of the table. But you can comment on that as well.
I mean, with any rep relationship, it's feeling like you're rowing the boat in the same direction. You know, I had not on the management side, but on the agency side, I had a failed rep relationship.
Yeah.
And that was the cause of that failure, was realizing, oh, you don't want me to be what I am. You're just trying to shoehorn me into this thing in case it pops and blah, blah, blah. Like, so the biggest thing is like, just whether, and I say the same thing about a movie, it's at the beginning of a movie with a relationship with an executive, you want to make sure you're all making the same movie, because that's not something you want to find out 6 months down the road. Once you've delivered a draft, they were expecting something else. They thought, and so when I talk, you know, when we're talking about reps, you want to make sure, don't just say what you think a rep wants to hear, you know, to get someone to pick you up. You want to be you at the end of the day. And you may not fully know who that is as far as your voice and everything yet, but it's just making sure you feel like this person wants to be in the business of you and believes in you as a storyteller and is not going to immediately say, oh, okay, you're an okay writer. I want you to write something like this because I don't have anyone who's writing that. Like, that's no good. The chances of success are nil at that. And again,
yeah, you got to be passionate, like collectively as a team,
yeah,
and creatively as a team. So there you go. Yeah, that hopefully that's a good answer for those folks who are not represented.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And I think the kind of concern with new writers breaking in is that they are kind of nervous to express themselves. They're kind of like, yes, whatever you want, I'll do it. I just want to get signed. And they kind of forget about their integrity and their point of view and their voice.
And I did that. And to your point, it's a trap. And it's hard to not do that when you're so, you know, desperately at times trying to get anyone to pay attention to you, and then someone does. The last thing you want to do is say, nah, not for me. You know, it's a huge mountain to climb. But even if you get into those relationships, you just want to be mindful of that. Do I feel like I'm being, with any relationship, do I feel like I'm being equally heard here, and that this is a relationship, and that I'm not just this thing you're taking a flyer on?
Right.
Right.
But or being dictated to, or being told. Like, I have friends who are writers who I don't represent. They're just friends who their agents or their previous managers tried to kind of pigeonhole them into something, and I don't want to say it like ruined those opportunities, but it was reflected in those opportunities creatively because they didn't have the passion for it. So do what you do it well, and find those people, you know, that you can surround yourself with who will support that, who will push you, you know, to be better, if you will. And then to a certain extent, you just have to have, you know, the general, I would say just a general, you know, kind of mutually creative kind of perspective of what should we work on next. Now, just to clarify, he's been so busy over the last couple of years that he and I haven't done as much development as we had in the past. But in the past, it's so important that as a rep, I'm not telling my clients change A, B, or C simply because that's what I think is cool. It's more along the lines of, if you have a manager, if you have an agent, those individuals should push you, should test you, but should ultimately be there to bring the best out of you, if you will. So anybody who tries to, do that in the wrong way, that's a big red flag, and you should be concerned. And then if it gets to a point where you feel like it's more than just a random occurrence, you should have good communication, because if you talk things out, usually things all come out, whether it's with your producers, with your showrunner, with your studio, with your representation or other writers. It's, just talk, make sure your communication is good. That's huge in this industry, huge.
Cool, love it. And I guess just very, very last question to Tyler, because I love this stuff. When you found out you sold your first project, where were you? And what was the first thought that went through your mind?
I don't even know this. I don't
because it was the first thing we sold was this movie that became Dark Was the Night, and it like half sold. It was optioned. It was here. It floated away. So like I didn't believe it had sold. Like I didn't believe it was a real thing. I was on set in New York because I've been burned so many times about people who we're gonna make this movie. We're gonna make this movie. And so I remember we had the conversations we had a lot with these producers, and we're gonna do it independently in New York. Okay, yeah, sure. I did some work. We did some. Okay, sure. And like you just like I said, you get to the point where success should surprise you. You're always like, well, this is going to fall. I don't know how, but it's going to be spectacular when this falls. And so, it was, I remember being on set that first day. When I walked on the set, I'd had this character, Paul Shields, who
is played by Kevin Durant.
And he had only lived in my head for 6-7 years, this character. And I remember it was a script I wrote in college, the first draft of that. I still have the first draft of that script at my house. And I remember walking onto that set and seeing Kevin standing in the front yard of the house we were shooting at, in costume, in character, and it was Paul Shields, and it was like this person who had only lived in my head and I've been telling everybody I knew about for 6 years was right there, and it was like walking through your own imagination, and it was the coolest thing in the world. And so that's the first time I believed that we were gonna make a movie.
Wow, I literally have goosebumps. That's awesome. Well, cool. I mean, we could talk to you forever, but this was fantastic. This was awesome. Great advice, great inspiration. Alex, thank you so much. This was awesome. And Tyler, thank you so much. This was awesome. So everybody, thank you. And we will all talk soon. So thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks,
Joe.
Bye. Bye, guys.